The King Center's beloved Community Talks convenes influential voices around the world, bridging the racial divides. These courageous conversations are the first of several spectacular beloved Community Talks in 2018 surrounding this most important topic plaguing our nation today. Join us in this movement. Let's have the conversation. Let's bridge the racial divide in our nation and world.
I wanted to ask Pastor Hayes, you and I were on a show together, taped here on TBN several months ago dealing with racism. And I wanted to see if you could share with us something you shared that night about the history of racism from a biblical, religious standpoint, because I think it's important that we hear that.
We as a church have been really good at racism for a long time. And it started, I mentioned the book of Acts earlier. Here's the roots of racism in my mind. The first 100 years of the New Testament church was awesome. The Apostle Paul went to Rome and reached the very family members of Caesar's household through the influence of the gospel. And the gospel went everywhere. By the time the emperor of Rome became Emperor Constantine, in the beginnings of the 4th century, he convenes a council called the Council of Nicaea, and I've been in the building in Nicaea where he convened this meeting. So watch this. In the book of Acts, at the birth of the church, the 12 apostles who convened that meeting and governed and started the structure of what we know as the New Testament church were all Jewish. By the time we get to 325 AD, Constantine has now become the head of the church. So the church was already hijacked by racists who kicked the Jews all out of the church, and every leader at the conference was non-Jewish by design. And then we move forward from there, and if you want to jump to the 15th century, then Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King, Martin Luther, who was the greatest reformer in Germany. For 20 years, this is historic fact, for 20 years Martin Luther reached out to the Jews to try to get them converted to Christianity. Apparently in his later life he got frustrated with the fact that he hadn't converted any of them. So he wrote a little booklet, and on what the Germans called Kristallnacht, he said, go now and burn their synagogues and destroy their Torahs and run them out of the nation. And that's what began to happen. Then in 1941, a man named Adolf Hitler, who was an Austrian but was ruling in Germany, the Nazi Party, quotes Martin Luther and says, our greatest reformer in Germany and greatest theologian, I will quote, said, burn their synagogues, destroy their Torahs, and run them out of Germany. And that's exactly what happened. So you can trace these roots all the way from the book of Acts. The church has really been good at racism for a long time. So until we really address the fact that it's been a part of us from our beginning, and we know who the divider is. So until we start to deal with it that way at its very root and lay the axe to the root of the tree, then we'll never fix these superficial problems. And if I can just say this in honor, John, of our brothers and sisters all over the world who are suffering, I feel really emotional now. I'm getting all dry mouth and everything, and I never do that. But I just returned a few weeks ago from one of the most moving trips I've ever been on, invited by the Kurdish forming government to say, would you help us write into our new constitution laws that will protect Christians, and we'll be the first Muslim nation in the world that will provide safety and freedom of worship. And I was in those meetings with those men, and then they took me on a tour to the Nineveh Plains where Jonah was sent to. That's where all the Christians in northern Iraq lived until ISIS came through. And I looked at a young pastor and I said, did your congregation suffer? And with broken English, he said, till now. Till this night, 68 of our women in my church are in ISIS captivity, and all the rest of my congregation is killed. So we went to tour the Nineveh Plains, and John, they have killed our brothers and sisters by the thousands in the Middle East in the last 18 months. They're suffering at that level. And all of that stuff has the same root. So we got a lot of work to do in this country, because this is and still is, especially just returning from a trip like that, the greatest nation in the history of the world.
Thank you for watching this segment of Beloved Community Talks. For information on how you can join us in bridging the racial divide by hosting your own courageous conversation, please visit us on the web at belovedcommunitytalks.org. We hope that you were inspired and will continue to take action with us to expand the Beloved Community movement against racism through nonviolent methods around the globe. Together, we will bridge the racial divide and fulfill Dr. King's dream of building the beloved community.